This is Rocky Snyder. At the tone, leave your name and message and I'll get back to you.
I have an urgent message from Lord Helmet. He's lost the princess.
Where?
Somewhere in the sands of Vega.
Tell him to comb the desert, you hear me? Comb the desert!
In this episode, I sit down with my colleague Ameer Aldagher, a movement specialist in Kuwait. Tell me about the fitness culture in Kuwait. Like, what compare and contrasting other Western worlds or industrialized countries, communities, what is it like?
So in Kuwait, bodybuilding is huge. So Kuwait is considered the bodybuilding mecca of the world. So you got Americans, Europeans coming here to focus on bodybuilding, and we got like Mr. Olympias and whatnot here in Kuwait. And I think that kind of stems from the culture of where we're really big on showing off what we have, right? In terms of, let's say, money, also bodies. So you got, plastic surgery is huge here, and so is bodybuilding. So a lot of anabolic steroids and whatnot, guys trying to look big. However, in the last few years, let's say maybe 5 to 10 years, CrossFit has had its move over here. And now what you call functional training is making a move. So you can say whatever the world was like, let's say 10 years ago, this is where we're at right now.
Uh-huh.
But due to exposure to social media and Instagram and all these social platforms, I was more exposed to more of a biomechanical point of view to the body and whatnot, and that is slowly penetrating the market here. But from a fitness point of view, it's not that diversified because compared to the US and Europe, we don't have much outdoor activities. It's really hot. So right now the peak is about 52, 53 degrees Celsius. That's about 120 maybe. So maybe you can hear my AC right now, but if that breaks down, I'm dead.
Wow.
So the movement happens within the gym and the gym only, except for stuff like soccer and maybe some water sports and some other activities. So it's heavily based in the gym. So
But
the gym
that must be
culture
done in the evening hours, though, right? Like any outdoor activity, I would imagine in the early morning hours before the sun really starts to penetrate, or as things cool off in the desert and you're doing things in the middle of the night.
Yeah, well, you got to factor in that you also have buildings and cars and whatnot, so that also heats up the area. So at around, let's say, 5 to 6 p.m., it's still hovering around 40 degrees Celsius, which is about 103 Fahrenheit. So it's not pleasant. You still have people playing soccer and whatnot, but that's about it. And they're like hardcore people who actually play at night. So we wait till the winter, which starts around maybe October, but that's still not, full on winter with snow and whatnot. It hovers around maybe 15 to 10 degrees Celsius, which is about, I don't know how much that is, maybe 50 or maybe 50 to 60, I would say about that.
So that's a great laboratory or research opportunity. I imagine you have some exercise physiologists over there research, whether it's at Kuwaiti University or wherever, but I imagine just that type of environment must be giving a whole bunch of information toward exercise science.
Man, I wish. Unfortunately, we do not do much research when it comes to exercise physiology or biomechanics. The sad part is that we're still stuck in the mentality of, I don't know if this was the case in the US. I'm assuming it was, but if it's not engineering or medicine, it's not really that valuable. But now recently we've been gaining that popularity of physiology. So I know maybe of 2 or 3 people in Kuwait who are exercise physiologists, but they're also facing the opposition of, this is not really important. Why do we need to conduct these researches? Why do we need to look at these numbers and see what these movements are about or markers are about? So, but that is changing. Slowly though. But you're right. I mean, you got a really nice hub for special kind of injuries, you know, resulting from a very, very sedentary lifestyle. So stuff that I don't see in the West is like a lot of flat feet, right? The West, meaning the US and the UK, you don't see a lot of flat feet. In Kuwait, and maybe that has to do also with genetics, but we, like maybe around 30 to 40% of people I see have fallen arches, or what you call, you know, over-pronated feet. They're stuck in pronation. But when I go to courses in Europe, like Holland or, you know, the Netherlands or Germany, it's usually higher arches. I don't know if that has to do with our lifestyle. I'm assuming it would be. And lack of activity, the intrinsic foot muscles and the whole body doesn't get much stimulation on our end. So yeah, it's unique. It's even when you apply fitness to it, you got to start really slow, because people tend to go from 0 to 100 real quick here, trying to prepare for the summer and whatnot.
Yeah, that's also unfortunately the American way, is that instant gratification from 0 to 1,000 in less than a second. So we see, in fact, that's one thing that I will keep bringing up, is the increased level of sedentary existence, the lack of purposeful human motion that level of movement is decreasing on a daily basis, so that the people that we were training only a handful of years before were actually on average more structurally sound than the people walking in the door now. And then couple that in with the approach to high intensity training, is just adding for a disaster. I imagine though, granted you're inside air conditioned places, but with 120 degrees Fahrenheit outside, the air conditioning is not keeping it so low. You're still very warm in those environments. And I wonder if there is a more susceptibility to injury because of the heat and how proprioception is, or if it is just the opposite. I mean, what are the major things that you're dealing with the clients that are coming in to see you? What is it? Or perhaps you're specialized. I know you have a background in fascial work and biomechanics, so I'm sure that we are parallel in some ways. Like the type of people that come see you may be dealing with chronic or acute injuries. They're not necessarily the bodybuilders that are looking to aesthetically build. But is that right?
Well, let's get to your point about the ACs, air conditioning, being everywhere. Well, in other cultures or other cities, you have, maybe in some cities in the US, but you have public transportation, maybe efficient ones, right? So you go about, you know, going from point A to point B on your foot walking. So you kind of get those steps in throughout the day. You might get 6,000 to 7,000, probably more in Europe in a day. But our state is that we go from one place to another, either, you know, it's always a car. We have to take the car anywhere. So it's 0 steps throughout the day, especially if you have a desk job. And then you got to get those 10,000 that, you know, the industry tells us to achieve per day. So we don't have separated bouts of movements. It's all in a batch, you know what I mean? So it's really interesting. So that creates a certain type of injuries and whatnot, but mostly, and I think that's the case all over the world, but number one thing is lower back pain, chronic lower back pain. And then when you have someone in and you're looking at their whole structure, their gait, certain testing that I use from Gary Ward, how the pelvis is moving and whatnot, they're kind of like saying, what are you looking at my feet? That doesn't make sense. So I've kind of like taken on that responsibility to actually look at, and we don't have many people that do that in Kuwait, but look at the whole structure, actually check out their breathing. And they're always weirded out by that. Like, I have a shoulder issue, why are you checking out my breathing? So it's usually that we have the culture of, I go to a doctor first, you know, he has to be wearing, you know, the robe and whatnot, and, or the coat, the white coat, to give that, you know, sense of hierarchy. And then if that doesn't work out, I'll go to a physio, and then I'll see any other alternative stuff. So I kind of have that funnel, and I get really chronic pain patients. Some cases also of scoliosis and whatnot, because there's no other option here. The exercises that are given for scoliosis patients, that doesn't really go to the root of the issue, or doesn't try to really mitigate the issue. It's usually like bird dogs, and we can talk about that in details, and doesn't really look at the pelvis and the rib cage and how you can go about it from a holistic point of view. So it's chronic pain and structural abnormalities that I actually deal with the most.
And obviously we're in very similar worlds in so many ways with that the power for most people lies in whatever the doctor says. And unfortunately in medical school, biomechanics are maybe a 2-week-long process out of 6 years of study. But we also have, at least we're fortunate here on the Central Coast of California, to have more alternative methods than the conventional Western approach. So we've got chiropractic, traditional Chinese medicine, osteopathy, acupuncture, and a myriad of manual styles of therapy. So that's quite nice. I'm wondering, do you have any similar situations? How welcome is chiropractic or acupuncture within your culture?
Well, again, due to the social media videos that you see of chiropractic adjustments, people are actually looking for that. Because I don't know how we're actually wired to think that if you hear a click after an adjustment, that must work, right? So we have a few centers that have gotten chiropractors, foreign chiropractors from the US or Europe, and also a couple of osteopaths. So that is making its way into the Kuwaiti culture. However, it's going to take some time for it to really integrate within the system. But also you have the what do you call it? The traditional healers of Kuwait, where they use, how can I describe this? Kind of like old school Chinese medicine, but it's Arab medicine.
Sure.
They have their own methods and whatnot, so it's not really medicine. So it's kind of like inherited knowledge from one person to another. And due to the system, if the system doesn't work for a specific problem, people usually go to those people. But yes, we are having a more integrative approach to health and healing.
Very good. Now, you went to one of the anatomy and motion courses was it Lisbon last year?
Yes.
Oh, right. And then, and was that your first encounter with anatomy and motion? Had you been studying it? I mean, what drew you to that, I guess, is a question I'd like to ask.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, the first encounter with biomechanics and posture was through anatomy trains, Thomas Meyer's work. And that kind of like blew me away. The integration of that with fascia. And then how is that put in motion? That kind of got me going, right? Because then you realize, once you discover that I don't know much about the human body. I was always into fitness and building muscle and whatnot, and trying to improve my sports performance, whether it was in boxing or basketball. That's where I come from. But then once you are introduced to biomechanics, you're like, the stuff is much more complicated than that. So I went through that. And then I did some stuff with functional patterns, if you've heard of functional patterns in Nagi Aguilar's system, where they actually based all their training on the gait cycle. But then I realized that system lacks the foot knowledge. And that's how I was introduced into anatomy trains through David Gray. If you know of David on Instagram, his work is phenomenal. So I went down that path. So I kind of had an idea of what gait training is, slings and whatnot from a fascial point of view, also from a biomechanical point of view. However, Gary's work put everything into the foot, how you can track everything back to the foot. And that was just like one of the missing pieces. I never thought of pronation as being something positive, because I have overly pronated feet as well. Gary, when the first time he saw my feet, he's like, oh, this is really interesting. The whole class was just waiting. I'll send you a picture afterwards. they were waiting to see how Gary would approach my foot, because to every course that I go and I have to take my shoes off, it really, you know, grabs the attention of people. They're like, those are the flattest pair of feet that I've ever seen in my life. So that kind of also was ingrained in me, because growing up, my mom noticed that, because she has flat feet and my grandfather has really flat feet, but they never had issues like I did. I had issues early on, like ankle issues, knee issues, back issues, around my early 20s. Yeah. So when I was young, she used to take me to, you know, a podiatrist, and he would give her like these really heavy boots, really rigid boots. And he would tell her, let him wear these boots all day long. And I would do that. I would wear these boots at home while on the couch or doing whatever, running around with these boots, thinking that they would mold my feet. Now that's really interesting. They actually messed up my feet even more, as you would think, right?
Yeah.
So I always had this interest in feet, and how I always wanted to feel like what a normal foot really feels like. I was always interested, you know? So that's why I was really interested in Gary's work. I watched some of his videos with BBC, watched some of his older videos, maybe from 2008 or 10, doing some hamstring stuff. And I'm like, this is really interesting stuff. And it's been around since 2008. So I said, you know, Lisbon was the last 6-day course ever. And
Yeah.
I got the chance to attend it. And that was really interesting. And it was really interesting to see PTs and trainers, and they're all just like lost in this system and trying to figure things out. And it's a totally new look to the human body. So it was a really nice journey of everyone coming in. So yeah, that's what I was introduced.
Yeah, there's a lot of unlearning that needs to occur based on what we've known from
Definitely.
previous, you know, our previous knowledge of the body is incomplete and perhaps not quite correct either. So that was something that I had struggled actually in the 90s, when for us, bodybuilding was very much exploding from the late 70s all the way through the 90s. And I got caught up with it from about, late 80s to probably about 1994 or so. And then I had this burnout and got turned on to the importance of the alignment of posture and what that really meant, and how it really was an indication of overall health and function. And so having to put aside all of that previous knowledge and experience with bodybuilding, and recognizing that in many ways, the approach that is being taken with bodybuilding as it is today is the antithesis of bringing the body back into good alignment. There are those professionals out there that are attempting to do that in the bodybuilding world, but most are all about compartmentalizing and building hypertrophy and definition in areas that don't take into consideration true function of the body, just how the muscles move. But for me, having to put all that aside and recognize that what I was doing was actually creating more harm, most likely, to my clients and to myself, and then to actually let that go and to take on a whole new approach was, well, it was very challenging. I mean, there must be some, to a certain degree, fortunately, probably for yourself, Ameer, as you started learning all of this, you didn't have a whole bunch of that previous knowledge to let go of. Is that accurate?
I did actually. I did. My brother owned a bodybuilding gym, so that was how I got into it. Plus, you know, being a teenager, that's where I started, you know, looking at working out and movement and whatnot. And you know, in Kuwait we have the classic. You do day 1 is chest and biceps, day 2 is lats and triceps, and you have that. You know, it's really ingrained in you.
Yeah.
You know, for long years, and you can't really explain it to people that how just unlocking some misalignment in the body is going to just improve performance, and that's all that you need. It's going to reduce pain and get the body what it needs. It has everything that it needs. You can build speed, you can build power and strength, through alignment. However, over here, it is seen as more of a feminine type of approach.
Sure.
Let's say power versus force. We can use that. People are trying to force movements rather than being innately powerful within them through alignment. And that is a tough message to get across. I started off as talking about that from the get-go on Instagram and trying to explain to people and my clients what that is about, but that is a higher form of philosophy. You can't just start there. You have to ease your way into it.
Yeah, there has
First
to
of all,
be
you have to question,
there's
exactly. You gotta question.
Go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah, you gotta question the status quo at first. So one thing that I always question is that why do you need, for example, more muscles? Where do we get this idea from? More muscle equals more strength or more power or better performance or efficiency. Second thing that I always question is that why do we need to stretch more? Why is that a modern cultural thing that the more flexible you are, or it stems from the idea of the more the better, but it's not. Everything has to be in the right proportions, the right timing, and that takes people a long time to figure out. Because now in the past 2-3 years, yoga has been making its move over here. We have a lot of yoga studios now, and people are getting into yoga, so they're getting these conflicting messaging. Yoga is about stretching. Well, its origins is not about that, but right now it's being sold as being flexible and healthy. And then Ameer comes and says, why are we really statically stretching? What is that doing to the elasticity of the muscles, the function of the whole body? What is that doing to the gait cycle? What is that doing to the contractile potential of the muscles? And then you get, people are frozen at that point. They don't know what kind of decision to make, because now they're presented with two different pieces of information that are conflicting, and they're coming from two credible sources. And now they got to, use critical thinking. And, by experience, that as well, that people don't like to use critical thinking.
No.
It's very tough. Yeah. So a lot of education has to go through it. A lot of questioning and asking why is the biggest question. And that's what Gary's system is about. If you want to put in a wedge, why do you want to put that wedge there? Why is the first question. And it's the most uncomfortable question. Why is the most uncomfortable question?
It is.
So, yeah.
For me, one of the hardest things that I have been seeking to achieve over the years is a group of sentences, maybe even a paragraph that would express it all. But what I'm realizing is that it is an educational process. Our studio, yes, it's a training facility, but we call it an educational center because we need to impart a whole bunch of information to show people and to let them understand that what they really need is not what they think they're coming in for. And this, the Marvel universe doesn't help much when we see all of these superheroes on the big screen and their physique is the way it is, when in truth, just like you say, why are we seeking that? When honestly, if we're looking for a greater deal of performance, it doesn't necessarily involve extremely large muscles, but actually much more powerful and efficient ways in which to move in ways that aren't going to create greater degrees of compensation imbalances or a greater chance or likelihood of injury. So to try and boil it down into only a group of sentences and try and express all that, the importance of alignment, the importance of joint relationships and kinematic sequencing of movement, I will take my hat off to the first person that is truly able to do that and have an audience just drop their jaws and open their eyes and going, oh, of course, but it's a process. It's a long process, and it can be so frustrating at times, especially when people come in and they listen, they say, oh yeah, oh, that makes perfect sense. Okay, can we work my abs now? Or can we work my arms now? And you feel like, okay, you heard what I was saying, or you listened to me, but you actually didn't hear what the words were.
Yeah,
So,
well, if you go back to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If we're gonna function at that top level of consciousness, where you know you can kind of see life in 4D and really capture the meaning of movement, you're asking so much of people who have lower hierarchy of needs. So someone who's coming for you for abs probably has, I'm just gonna assume, or as an example, wants to lose weight to look better for the summer because he has some insecurities, and he doesn't care what you say about biomechanics if that need is not met. It's kind of like going to Africa and teaching them about philosophy, but all they need is food right now, right? For poor countries. So it is a collective action as well. So maybe the end user should not be the first person getting it. Just like you're doing right now, and in the group as well. You educate other providers, and that ripple effect happens, and slowly we get to that level. I'm seeing it change. It is changing. It's at a slower pace that what we want, right? We want everybody to start looking at the body as a whole system. But these things just take time. And then the problem is that you have the opposing systems as well enforcing. They're not really opposing. They're like the let's say the mechanistic point of view to the body, where this equals that, and it's not really a chain of things happening. Also providing information and education on the other side, right? So you're also battling that, or kind of like saying, hey, look, what you're saying is right, but there's more to it. And that's the problem, I think.
yeah, and that's why we aren't really, I won't say we don't cater to, but we don't have a lot of people coming in here that are seeking the CrossFit style workout, the high intensity kind of training. We don't have the bodybuilders that are coming into our studios. We actually have more of the intellectual crowd, or the crowd that is 45 and older, who have tried those methodologies, and now they're finding that their joints have broken down or need to be replaced, and they're looking to continue movement, but in a much more responsible and effective manner. And so just organically, what happens in our studio is we've got the 45 and older crowd. Yes, we'll have the younger kids from time to time, and we'll have those that are trying to fit into a bikini or a wedding dress, but they are a very small percentage compared to the people that are seeking us because of chronic and acute pain, or they're finished with physical therapy, or some doctor had recommended coming over here because of the outcome that occurs. And I will say to your point too, is that it is happening. Granted, it's not at the rate that we would like it, but presenting at places, international and national, and to get the feedback from professionals in the audience that are either physical therapists, trainers, manual therapists, or even some medical doctors even, that'll come up afterwards and say, this is the stuff that we've been missing. This is what we need. So that's encouraging to know that the information that we're gathering through guys like Gary Ward and Tom Myers and Gary Gray, James Earl, perhaps, right? And Robert Schleip and the rest of the crew there. This is the stuff that really needs to be shared, learned, and really incorporated, because well, we just see it every day. Now, the one thing that you mentioned too that we haven't brought up is you mentioned your clients, but in a masculine way, and you say he, but you've never said that you have female clients, and the difference in the culture of bodybuilding, seeing as a very masculine thing, and then more biomechanics and proper movements and getting the body is more of a feminine approach. What's the cultural geography there for you when it comes to training female clients versus male clients?
Well, I have more female clients than male clients, actually.
All right.
I don't know why I referred to, maybe it's some programming I've been exposed to, but
no problem.
it's quite interesting, my language. But in Kuwait especially, I don't know why. I don't know if it's the same thing in the US or you find it the same thing in the US, but newer methods are usually adopted by females first.
Yeah. They're
I
more
don't know
willing to
why.
learn. You know,
Exactly.
guys have an ego that it took a while for me to even gain male clients at the early years of personal training. Almost every client I had was female because they're okay with not knowing something and being able to admit it and learn.
Exactly. And then just like you said, the ego issue where, you know, you present, so I mix and match stuff from like Gary Ward's or Franz Bosch, if you've heard of Franz Bosch, some stuff from functional patterns, and these stuff, the exercises that are provided are very basic and they're mostly body weight, but it tackles their weakness at the deepest level, right? And that kind of exposes them. I think for guys, masculine guys, power lifters or CrossFitters, it's tough to accept that I have to come to a guy to show me how to hinge properly or how to really use my adductors in an integrative way, and that's gonna fix my knee issue. I can actually, and especially if he has been in the industry for a long time, he would just assume that, you know, if this is all he's gonna do and he's not gonna put his hands on me and maybe release something, which I do for maybe first few sessions, then I can just do it, you know, at my own gym. Or I've seen great results with powerlifters and CrossFitters, but they're usually the people who don't come back. They're willing to, you know, because I think the idea of powerlifting and CrossFit most of the time is built on, you know, no pain, no gain, right? So pain is normal. So why would I not keep on coming up? Why would I fix the issue if the issue is never going to go away, right? So I'm just wasting my money. You have that kind of situation going on. But the females are great. You know, they're open to new ideas. When I send them a certain video or something to read, they would do it. And those are the clients that matter, to be honest. Sorry.
The interesting thing for me, like what you were saying about putting people in positions or into movements, getting them to explore the dark zones where they don't move into or out of very well, and to see how taxing on the system, how exhausting that can be. On average, and we're generalizing here because there's always exceptions, but on average, the female clients are quite amazed and intrigued and will continue with this exploration into these areas that they do not travel because of the results that they get from it. Whereas the male client will, on average, think that because we've hit a weakness, we must automatically grab more weight and load into that system, when in fact it would overload the system and it would compromise the movement. And they believe that they're working harder and better by adding weight to their body, when in fact you've just changed the mechanics and you have really bastardized the movement to the point where it's no longer doing what it is we want. So to really get them to understand that we must first get the movement under control and into a certain pattern and load the tissue and get the body to realize it, and then we can perhaps start working on loading. That's a challenging conversation to have with a lot of guys.
It is, yeah. I mean, you know, you got some techniques or methods that are more subtle, and you ease into it and they get great results. But when you have a type of client that is used to hardcore training and lifting heavy weights, I kind of tend to challenge them more early on in the session to kind of humble them down and say, you know, this is what you need. You know, you're very weak here. You've been squatting over 200 kilograms, you know, for the past few months, but you cannot bend your knee properly. You're hyperextending with every step.
Yes.
And he's like, and I take a picture of his knees and I'm like, look, there's super hyperextension with every step. And he's like, oh my God, I've never seen that before. I'm like, okay, let's try bending your knee in a certain situation, in a certain position, and let's see how that feels. And then he gets up and my back feels great. And I've been to so many manual therapists and they haven't done that for me. But then I think the issue becomes that he has to do more homework as well, right? Because he has to take on responsibility. And maybe as an athlete, because I was actually dealing with one of the best athletes in Kuwait. And I think he saw that there's an additional responsibility that he can outsource to a manual therapist as well, which can get him some kind of relief from time to time. But it is a nice struggle. One of my colleagues, or one of the participants of one of the courses I took in the Netherlands, had a really great approach to this problem. He would schedule people in for 5-minute interviews or conversations, he would call them. So somebody would ring him up, say, hey, I'm interested in your therapy or your training. You come, okay, I have a slot open at 10 a.m. Let's have coffee and talk about it. And we would see if we're a good fit. So he would actually refuse clients if he saw that they had the wrong mindset or not the appropriate mindset for his type of approach. I'm like, that, takes great confidence and clarity to really show the other side that, I don't need your money. I really want this to work out. And in the long run, it's the best for me and you. And I've been thinking about incorporating that in my own practice. And I think it's a much better flow of work, But then you kind of miss out on the people who don't know what they really need, right? I have no idea that this is what I need. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, back to putting people into situations. I hear that, and the fear of firing a client or saying no to somebody is something that is daunting. And to be brave enough to hand select in a way the clients that you want to work with is really something to aspire to, for sure. There's almost nothing that gives me greater pleasure in my work than to have somebody who is incredibly strong, potentially, a high-level athlete or aspiring one, and put them in a position that exposes their weakness, and then have that conversation with them saying, wow, you can deadlift this much, you can do these many exercises or run this fast, and yet you can't hold yourself in this position for more than a second without collapsing. So exactly. How strong is your chain if we just expose one of your weak links? We could just stop here and have you go and do the 200 kilo squat or clean and jerk, but you're going to have this as your Achilles. This is your weak area. So which one do you want to focus on? It's really easy to focus on our strengths, but we won't improve truly unless we really expose the weaknesses and start to develop those and no longer make them our weakness, but actually turn them into our strengths. So that's the beauty of, I think, what we do as these professionals with biomechanics and the understanding of human motion, is to place people into positions that expose them as well as being susceptible or not impervious, and then to show them that we can get you closer to that, and we can make it so that the knee pain or the low back pain is probably going to go away, or at least change, because of how you're moving and how you're training. So
yeah, and it can be like something as simple as adopting a new idea is really tough over here, especially something like breathing, right? If you want to tell someone, I'm going to teach you how to breathe, or I'm going to do some corrective breathing exercises. I'm going to teach you how to use your left side of your diaphragm versus your right side of the diaphragm, and try to depress your left rib cage. And I saw a really interesting comment on Instagram, one of the breathing courses or classes, and this guy was making fun of people trying to sell air, right? Because you're teaching people how to breathe. They think it's a scam, right? It's what do you mean you're going to teach me how to breathe? What do you mean you're going to teach me how to walk? And that's what the model is about. And it takes a lot of shedding away of layering, of conditioning, and saying, no, the breath is the the deepest core function of the body in terms of movement, and we can focus on that and get you out of pain. It's really tough to explain that to people. So the cultural view of things is really important, especially over here, because whenever a new idea pops up, which is not new anymore in the US and Europe, they immediately assume it's a scam, right? It's I'm a scam artist trying to scam them to this new thing which is not effective. But then this is why one of the methods that, Ida Roth, I think, has started way back in the day, of taking pictures of before and afters of her scoliosis patients. And that's a great way to see that, my method works, and, the results are out there, and I can show you how structures can change, how gait can change, how foot pressures can change, and all of that. So that's a great way to actually prove to people that, these are the results. You can just take it or leave it.
Yeah, Ida's work, as well as Moshe Feldenkrais, Thomas Hanna with somatics, all those types of approaches, whether hands-on or hands-off, are kind of the bedrock of where we are now, which is fantastic. And
yeah.
So do you have colleagues in Kuwait or are you one of the few? I imagine you're probably one of the few that are taking this approach, because the fact that you have to travel outside there, and with bodybuilding being so prevalent, how are you received within the colleagues of fitness professionals around your town?
So I've seen it also in Europe and the US, but whenever, an engineer is in the room, it's kind of weird, right? Like, you're an engineer, why are you here? It's usually a fitness professional or a physio or a chiro. But then I come from an engineering background, and that kind of like lowers my credibility in their eyes, right? Because what do you know about movement? Although movement is engineering. So within the physio community, they're still approaching therapy the traditional way. Within the fitness community, as you said, got the bodybuilders and whatnot, but we do have some new practitioners that are, going into this side of the world, this side of the movement world, and I've kind of made some connections with them. I think I was one of the first few in Kuwait around 2015, 16 that kind of went into this field. And I really wanted just to have, a conversation about movement locally, because whenever I want to nerd out about anatomy in motion or biomechanics, it's tough to have it with someone who looks at the body from a mechanistic point of view. So I kind of had to seek out those people and get in contact with them, but they're very few. There are about maybe 3 to 4 people in Kuwait that actually have kind of the same approach. There's actually just one senior physio here who has learned from John Barnes and all the big fascia scientists and experts throughout her years, and she's one of the few people who I actually can click with. So it's tough not having a community to at least just talk about stuff with, or I just share some information with. So that is the toughest part. However, I think I've managed to grow some followings on social media, and people, I've seen it in neighboring countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Dubai and whatnot. Things are just like catching on now, and I think in a few years' time, we will have that kind of community that is, local.
Nice. Yeah, we also have the online community with Anatomy in Motion and the group forum on Facebook, but there's some that will often do hangouts. I've done some about every other month. Before shelter in place came into effect in March, we were doing every other month hangouts where people would come in from the Bay Area or all, within driving distance from here, and would meet on a Sunday. There'd be about half a dozen, but then we started doing it online as well. So we started having about the same number, if not more people going through Zoom meeting and starting to collaborate that way. And now it sounds like that's all that's been happening are hangouts through Zoom meetings. So have you been on any of those?
I've been on the Hangouts. I've been with on some of Chris's classes.
Oh yeah.
They've been great. I don't know. Chris is a great guy. He brings out something new in every single class. He's so passionate about it. His approach to it is, he brings the metaphysical world to it and tries to tie everything up. So it's really attractive. As far as clients, working with online clients has been tough. So I think, to be extremely honest, I think, the getting the information across has been the toughest part of it. So I think instead of 100% or 90% of the information getting across and knowing exactly what the client should do, I think maybe 70 to 65% of that information is really being transferred. Because for some of the stuff you kind of have to be there, right?
Yeah.
But then again, you can do a lot online, and we're trying to keep the ball rolling. But this is the toughest part.
Yeah, I've got.
But then again, yeah. I mean, but then again,
having your hands there and actually physically connecting, there's so much more information you gain from there. That 65-70% efficacy just via online, I would agree with that, because there's times where I leave the session and just feel somewhat empty and not as effective as I wanted to be. There was something I was missing, and I actually literally could not put my finger on it because I couldn't put my hands on them. So yeah, it's great that we can still have these interactions with clients through the online process, but there is an element that is missing that can't get through the computer. So
exactly, yeah. You can't really see their facial expressions. Are they really struggling with that exercise? Are they smiling because it feels good? Is their knee making a weird sound? You can't really pick up on all these signals.
And
however, I think it was
down in the feet. Like, can I really get a sense of what that cuboid or calcaneus is doing? What is going on at that first met? I mean, I can see it somewhat on the screen, but I just have much more insight when I can be there in person and really just, what is that tissue doing? Because you're only seeing through a screen, who knows what the color hue scheme is going to be on this laptop. And I'm not seeing the tissue change. There's so much that you can see up close and personal in real life that is really hard to detect through a monitor.
Exactly, yes. Plus, I mean, if you have an hour or 45-minute session, half of it is just gone on really camera placement and what you're trying to see and whatnot. So that's a tough one. So you got to really simplify stuff, and maybe you can only take in a few type of individuals who maybe have a background in movement and whatnot, and can really understand what you mean by, maybe pronation, supination, or eversion, inversion, or have some kind of neurological control over their body.
Yes.
But fresh clients who a stay-at-home mom who hasn't worked out in 20 years, that's a tough client. It's a really tough client. You want to help them, but I think it wouldn't be as successful as you would expect.
And I think the other thing that we haven't really touched on is that with the lack of movement comes a diminishment of feedback in the body. So there's a lot of people that don't have a good neural map. They aren't connected with their physical body. And we're trying to bring awareness to that body where there is no awareness. So that in itself is just for those fresh clients, like that client you just described for 20 years, who's been a stay-at-home housewife or whatnot, and hasn't moved their body. That's a daunting task compared to, say, a dancer or a gymnast or a martial artist, somebody that has the finer skill and awareness of where their body is in space. That's joyful and much, I won't say easier, but much more accessible to really dive into the finer points. So you get somebody who you interview their body and say, okay, what do you feel going on here? I don't know. That whole kind of quick answer, I don't know. I have no idea. Like, wow, that is just slamming the door shut with every question.
Exactly.
and I need some interaction and some help here. See if you can just move with a little bit more awareness, or give me a little bit more effort on your part, because I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to guide you in order for yourself to I don't even want to say fix, but to bring you to a different place where the things you're feeling now are no longer there. You know, to bring some awareness into you. And if you're not willing to, or worse yet, if you don't have the capability of being aware, it's going to be a lot harder to make any change.
Exactly. So have your clients been mainly maybe online from the AIM community, from the anatomy and motion community mostly?
Yes, yeah. Well, more and more now. I just was online with a woman from North Carolina who was having some Achilles issues and was turned on to me through a colleague. And that was one of those episodes where, yes, we were able to get it feeling better. But then I went one step further and said, well, let's try this. And without being able to be there, then I have a feeling that the movement really wasn't where I wanted it to be, and it aggravated the situation. So we had to kind of just back off that and kind of go through the mechanics again of what we were doing before that really allowed it to feel good. And by that time, well, it was a little bit on the aggravated side and just needed to settle down. But that's one of the drawbacks. But yeah, a lot of my clients, I've got some people in the San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles, North Carolina, Virginia, Montreal, and the UK. So I see them on occasions, not on a regular basis, not like every other day or anything, but give them things to work with. And in a few weeks, we'll check back and kind of go and follow up with that. But I do have, what's nice is where we are right here south of San Francisco in this little county, we are still able to keep our doors open. For how much longer, I don't know, but we are able to bring people in, donning masks over our faces and work with them in that way. But how long that's going to happen, I'm not sure, but we do have people coming in for that. And the nice thing is in this community is that we have a tremendous amount of orthopedic surgeons and chiropractors, sports med doctors, and other kinds of health providers who recognize the work that we do and see the effectiveness of it, and will readily refer people over. So we have built up a pretty good network of referral teams, and we will refer to them when needed also. But yeah, we've got quite a few people that are calling, walking in and so on because of that, the type of approach that we're doing. And of course, CrossFit is headquartered. It started right here, only a mile down the road. So Greg, who started it, he and I worked in the same fitness studio. I left a few years before. Yeah, so Greg Glassman and I, we worked at this family-run health club called Spa Fitness Centers. And I left there as the fitness director and moved down the road about a half mile and opened up my studio. A few years later, he did the same thing and went down the other end of the street to a research park warehouse and started CrossFit. And of course, the rest is history. But we remain colleagues and will speak from time to time. We definitely have different approaches and move in different directions, but what he's been able to do in the world is quite remarkable to get people moving.
And it's, I think the biggest thing that CrossFit has done is not introduce it to a new type of workout, but introduce community in the idea of working out, right? Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. And I was just talking to a friend of mine about that, and I think just the psychology of actually, I don't know if you've done a CrossFit workout, but after your workout, kind of like, or that was the case in my gym, they would write out your name and then your score next to it. And then it kind of like gets competitive. And that kind of feeling where you see your name on the board with a score gives you that sense of accomplishment. Yeah. Even if, you were last, but, there's a chance for improvement. You can compare yourself. And it really digs into the deepest, human tendencies for community. And I think that was the great thing about the lockdown, or the consequences of the lockdown, is that people had to meet online now and create these new types of communities. So I've actually seen after the lockdown, there's a lot of collaborations going on and a lot of programs. And I was extremely amazed by the amount of information being poured online for a cheap price, because people are trying to, make a living. great deal of information for a very reasonable price. And I was so happy about that.
Yeah.
And it kind of had to decentralize knowledge. You can see different types of approaches to movement. So I really benefited out of that. But maybe we can, down the line, if this is going to stay for longer, automate the online session experience where multiple cameras can be put at home and whatnot, and you can maybe, I don't know, see the body from different angles, because this is one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, I agree.
So we'll see how it plays out.
Well, this has been great. I love talking shop. I love learning about different cultures as well. And because we are so Amerocentric here, where anything outside of the United States practically doesn't exist. And yet most of the world's greatest information when it comes to movement has not been bred and born in the United States. We've bastardized everything that's come into our borders. Now we have fusion yoga and yoga lattes and everything. But you get such amazing information from Poland, Germany, China, Japan, just England. And they're coming in here and integrating into our world in such a wonderful way. But it's really great to know, honestly, what is it like in the fitness world in Kuwait versus the United States or Mexico, for that matter. It's encouraging too to know that the work that we're doing is infiltrating different cultures and is becoming welcoming, sometimes quicker, sometimes slower, but nonetheless, this is just a really nice kind of reinforcement that, if nothing else, that I feel like we're in the right direction, that we are helping people in a way that is going to be more about longevity and a pain-free existence and a happier existence, more so than we're just trying to get into next year's swimsuit model edition or whatever it is. So
exactly. I mean, the philosophy that you're trying to provide is pretty deep, and it has layers to it. So I think it's just going to take time and some effort to get out there. And once you attract the right people, it's just a matter of time. So and conversations like these provide the best, environments for that kind of transfer of information and flourishment of the student.
There'll always be obstacle course races and bodybuilding and world's heavy man competitions. Those are great activities or sports, but yeah, the hope is that fitness can kind of transcend those things into something more true. And yeah, we just keep on having these conversations and listeners keep growing. So that's a good thing.
Exactly, man. This conversation has been really refreshing. I mean, it's about my bedtime right now, but I'm still up and going.
Well, I appreciate your time. This has been great.
Oh, no, man. It's my pleasure.
All right.
My pleasure, bro.
Well, I hope we connect again in the future. If not in the Hangouts with Anatomy in Motion, then just doing this banter back and forth, because I always get something from this.